We really do have a rock star panel that's here to talk about flipping the switch, flipping the script. We might flip the switch also. Throughout this conference, you've been hearing about a number of major events that are coming up, not just here in Los Angeles with the 2028 Olympics, but there's a host of other events that are slated over the next few years that are really going to take some creative solutions for cities and places to handle the influx of travelers that are coming to these regions while still maintaining the everyday needs of residents and workers and goods delivery and everything else that's happening in those regions. So it might be World Pride that's happening in Washington, D.C., or an inauguration that's going to happen in just a couple weeks. The nation's sesquicentennial in Philadelphia, or whatever the next version of the Eras Tour might be that sweeps the nation. So these kinds of things put a unique pressure on cities. They require nimble responses. They introduce a whole host of new challenges on top of the ones that we already have in our systems today. Needless to say, we don't have it all figured out just yet and how we can address some of those factors. Public sector agencies, transit authorities, transportation departments, they know well what the challenges are. They can see those challenges coming at them, but don't yet have the solution set that's going to really help navigate some of those challenges for them. The private sector, on the other hand, has a host of solutions that are oftentimes disconnected from those core problems that need to be solved, or the real operational realities or assets that are on the ground to make that feasible. So we have a mismatch oftentimes between the problems and solutions, and we need new ways to really catalyze and incentivize purpose-driven innovation that meets those needs, but also is viable to the private sector partners. And a lot of that has to do with where is the investment for that R&D? Where is the market that really inspires me to do that innovation, to think differently, and to make that investment? So we're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so talking about how the public sector can better pitch their problem sets to the private sector to really invite that innovation and invite those solution sets. We're going to talk about the challenges that the private sector then has to make that investment and what stands in their way and what are new constructs that might help us to bring that innovation. And then talking about how do we really scale and produce these different solution sets, who's ready to do it, and where should those investments take place. So this is a fantastic panel. A little bit of information about them. So Laura Chase is the president and CEO of ITS America. She promotes policies that advance the deployment and development of safe and intelligent transportation technologies. Central to Laura's work is the ability to implement complex initiatives with strong engagement and collaboration among stakeholders. She's passionate about, in addition to all of that, Laura is really passionate about bringing more female voices and diverse voices into the transportation workforce, particularly in transportation technology. And I will say that it is completely coincidental, but it speaks for itself that this is an all-women panel because they are literally the best in the industry. So happy to have that as a happy coincidence. Justine Johnson is the Chief Mobility Officer for the state of Michigan, and she leads the state's Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. That office seeks to enhance Michigan's mobility ecosystem and really grow those solution sets in the state of Michigan. In this role, she leads policy development and supports the startup and scale-up of emerging mobility technologies and businesses. But beyond that, Justine is a native Angelino, so she's happy to be back here. But she's also served previous roles, both here in Los Angeles and in New York City, as both the public sector, the private sector, and academia. So Justine really brings a wide diversity of perspectives to this conversation. Nora Oso is the program manager for the Intelligent Transportation Systems Joint Program Office, which we often call the JPO, in the U.S. Department of Transportation. She runs the Safety and Stakeholder Engagement Program. Her work focuses on promoting technology that has the potential to save lives and reduce serious injuries and scale them across our nation's roadways. And then Salita Reynolds, well known to many of you, is the Chief Innovation Officer at LA Metro, and she previously served as LA DOT's General Manager. She's championed rider-serving innovations, including the introduction of mobile ticketing, free transit for students, the development of the nation's largest electric vehicle car share program, and a pilot of the nation's largest universal basic mobility program. So really transformative and insightful program. So I want to begin with Salita and Justine talking about this mismatch that exists. So vendors, I know in LADOT has its really remarkable unsolicited proposal program, which undoubtedly ends up with a number of vendors coming to you with a host of solutions that sometimes might be solutions in search of a problem, where they really don't land with those things that you're really focused on trying to address, particularly when you have these large events coming up in Michigan, where you have a host of kind of solutions for both urban and rural environments that you're looking at. How do you navigate that kind of approach when those vendors are coming to you? What can you talk about as the role of the government, and how can we really help bring more connected solutions, connecting to your problems to you through that process? Salita?
Yeah, thanks, Karina, and thank you for hosting and moderating us. Karina is also a badass, in case you don't know. After she spent all of that time gassing us up, we just need to make sure we give it back. But I do want to just say, so I've been at LA Metro now for a little over 2 years, and the unsolicited proposals portal was created under a previous CEO, Phil Washington, and my predecessor, Dr. Joshua Schenk, created it because they had some really specific problems that they needed to solve, because the county had passed this huge sales tax measure, which continues to buffer and shield LA and LA Metro in some ways from a lot of the boom and bust that you see in places that are more reliant on federal or state funding, which is fantastic, and we're very grateful for it. But it is a huge capital program. I mean, it is just like LA County. It's sort of the scale of it really exceeds kind of the brain's ability to wrap around it. And there was no way to meet the voters' expectations using just traditional delivery methods. And so it was a really important tool, and we're really grateful for it to have it, because it is nice to be able to say to, and after a lot of times after, I'm sure many of you have this experience, you get off on stage, there's all this energy and excitement and entrepreneurs who want to come and talk to you, and you don't really have anywhere to send them. So it's very nice to be able to say, oh, we have a thing, here, go to this thing. But since it's been around for a while, there's no shortage of complaints about the thing that we have from the folks that are trying to put ideas forward. And I think it's because of the thing that you just described. There's still there's space between what entrepreneurs get funded, and imagine needs to be in the world, and what large agencies that manage complex systems of systems and carry huge exposure to liability for the delivery of those systems, the problems that they're trying to solve. And it's tough for entrepreneurs who are out there trying to raise funding to say, but look, the government, here's a problem the government has said that they have, and they want us to solve this problem. And those, funders want to see those government contracts come to fruition immediately. And they don't. Even through an unsolicited proposals portal, they take time. So there's a mismatch in terms of the problem and solution set, and there's a mismatch in terms of the runway. So what I've tried to do, at least in the last couple of years, is focus very heavily on things that are small and easy to deliver and iterate quickly, and things that I might have the money myself to fund. So my very favorite example is a company called Throne, which delivers mobile restrooms. I'll give you a minute to think about the name of that company and what it delivers and why it is such a clever name. We went out into the market and found them, and then asked them to submit a UP, because we thought the solution set was really interesting. And because it was small and scalable, and they were willing to do a quick proof of concept after we convinced them that we were more important than New York City, that wanted to button line in front of us. So it was like a very rare moment where West Coast nice trumped East Coast whatever. And we were able to convince them to come here, and it was a huge success. We did it at just a couple of stations, and now we have the funding, and it's blowing up and expanding because it was so popular. That is the kind of thing, the kind of success story that we need to be able to build on. But it isn't, it is. I don't know. You can argue whether or not it's sexy, but what it isn't is like a huge capital windfall, right? And you need like 10 of us transit agencies to say we're going to do that in order for Throne to be able to go and raise the money it wants to raise and do whatever it wants to do, right? So at that point, the other piece that's really important that public agencies don't do well but are starting to do better is aggregating market power.
Right.
And that's the other way, I think, to get to convince the private sector that where the money is solving our problems and not solving the sort of problems that their founder has experienced personally when trying to get home from the airport, for example.
Yeah, for example.
Just to pick a random example, home from Hawthorne to Bel Air, just to pick a random, totally random example.
Okay, so, but there's a couple of things that you said there that I think are really important. One is thinking about the problems from the user's experience, from a rider who is, needing to go with their 3 kids, transfer a couple of times. We want the transit system to be really efficient, but, it might take like 90 minutes to do that. Like, what are the chances that a 4-year-old is going to need a bathroom, right? Or an older adult? And so really kind of like thinking about those things that are, as you say, they're not innovation. I think we do have a misperception that innovation has to be like utterly transformative from like a systemic level down. It can be these very, somewhat typical user things that addressing those pain points begins to transform the entire system. So I think that's a really great example.
And it's a viewpoint to the root, which is that like those mobile restrooms, they solve a rider experience problem, no question. But the other thing they solve is the challenges that our janitorial crews were having in trying to keep the stations clean, which then adds to the overall perception of them as safe. And now they can spend more time focusing on, other things that need to be cleaned up. It's about the law enforcement that is spending all of their time dealing with a problem that is very solvable instead of being able to go deal with, the real felonies in progress that might be happening. And furthermore, even deeper, having those same law enforcement officers even want to take the shifts at the transit station. Because if the word on the street is, well, what you spend most of your time doing is keeping people from using the restroom in the corner, well, that's who wants to do that job? And these are voluntary shifts for these law enforcement agencies. So then you get either apathetic, disengaged, or absent law enforcement at some of these stations. So it's not just that we've solved, and that is a perspective that only the transit agency has, because they are the only ones that can see the whole chessboard.
Right. Justine, I'm going to come back to you in a second, but I want to go to Laura for a second, because something tells me that experience that LA Metro has with people maybe, urinating in not like the best places and all of those downstream kind of effects then that holds, you're not alone in that, right? What would happen if you actually had, I don't know, say 10, just to pick a number, transit agencies and maybe their city counterparts that all came together to say, do you have that problem too? Maybe we can do something about it together. And would there be a better market response to your point of aggregating? Would there be a better market response in bringing those solutions if now there's 10 potential sales that you could make rather than just one interesting unsolicited proposal portal that you can go through? I don't know, Laura, what do you think? Should you do something like that?
I think we should totally do something like that. And that's exactly what we are doing. I will say, so Salita and Karina, you both stole some of, my points here, which, right, is that Salita's exactly right. a lot of the things that are funded by venture capitalists are just not sexy. And a lot of the problems that cities or transit agencies are trying to solve are very important, but kind of mundane, right? And so I think that ties into this mismatch. So, what we're doing is pulling together the 10 World Cup cities, host cities, and the host transit agencies to come bring that market power together on the public sector side and cultivate a few key problem statements and challenges that we can then pitch back out to the private sector and say, here is what you can solve for. Here is what we actually need you to solve for. And by the way, if you can do it and do it well, you actually have a large buyer community here. And what I would say is, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you can solve for those 10 cities and 10 transit agencies, there's a whole lot more cities and transit agencies in the US who are going to have the same problems, who are going to need the same kinds of solutions. So I think, that's what is the power behind what we're engaging in here and why we're doing it. And it does, the title of this panel is Flipping the Script, right? It does kind of flip the script a little bit. It takes the public sector to saying to the private sector, here's what we want you to try to develop. And I will say there's a lot of private sector innovators out there who come to me and say, what do cities want? What do states want? What does the public sector want? How can I tweak my product? And I think there's so many ways to get that information if you can be a part of the conversations, really listen, come to the table to listen, not just to sell, right? And do that development, that kind of hard work of development with the public sector partners. This, we're gonna give it to you. We're gonna flip it right back out to the private sector and say, here it is, solve for it. And so I think it's gonna be an interesting opportunity, and we're looking forward to seeing what solutions come out of it.
Yeah, and I think it will be also really informative to have that kind of, sisterhood, brotherhood of the transit agencies and transportation departments kind of being able to see those shared. So you're looking at it through the transit, you've looked at it through a bunch of different lenses, but transit agencies often look at it through the transit lens. Transportation agencies look at it through the transportation operations lens. Turns out they have a lot in common in solving that. And so Justine, you're going even further in some of the work that you're doing to say, let's source this from across state departments that maybe have completely wildly different missions, but in fulfilling those missions have some common things. If you can talk about that.
Sure. And first, let me just talk a little bit about the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, because I think this is something that's very different. Governor Whitmer actually created this office via an executive directive, really with this goal of having a one-stop shop for all things mobility across the state of Michigan. We know that there's the Department of Transportation that's looking at things through one lens. We do have a sustainability department that's looking at different conversations around reducing emissions across the state. So carbon neutrality is a big goal for us. We're talking about labor and workforce and making sure that we're not leaving people behind and making sure that people are trained and skilled for the jobs of today and also the jobs of the future. And then we have to talk about the economy. So that's Michigan's Economic Development Corporation. So that's where my office sits under. But I literally sit right in the middle on a regular basis. I have 4 different directors who I pretty much regularly respond to if there are big issues or concerns. One of the unique things within the office is that we do have a funding program that is much different in terms of we are looking at funding opportunities to support early stage companies. So I actually get very excited when I speak to the 0 to 25 person company, because that's my sweet spot, right? And I know that people usually will come to me and say, well, what state incentives can you offer me? Well, you are a team of 2. So it's going to be hard, right, realistically, for us to talk about those larger incentives from a job perspective, because that's typically what a lot of state departments, especially with economic development incentives, are looking at. So for me, again, that smaller innovator, that small company that's looking to grow and scale within the state is something that's very important. We do have funding to support test sites and as well as real world deployment. So if anyone has an idea from around the world, as long as it's based in Michigan, Michigan, you can apply for funding on a rolling basis. And that could be, for us, this definition of mobility, moving people, goods, and information across land, water, and air. So if you're in aviation, maritime, et cetera, you can apply for this funding. And there are a series of other programs that we've created since I've joined the team, serving as Chief Mobility Officer. One of the things that I'm pursuing right now is, to this point, I've been knocking on a lot of doors across the state, even doors that are outside of my charter, to say, how can we start to think more creatively, but also more collaboratively across the state? What are some of the big challenges that you may be having as the Department of Health and Human Services, right? Most people will say, oh, I don't, there's a mobility solve in there somewhere when it comes to providing services for people who are in foster care, people who are going through a number of different services, public services as well. You think about Department of Education. How do we start to work with our education providers? What are some of those themes that we can start to pull on? And how can we start to look at our Michigan Mobility Funding Platform almost as like a innovation challenge, right? So how can we start to create these thematic rounds? Is safety a big concern? What does that umbrella of safety actually look like? And how are these challenges actually getting to government being your potential first customer? And I think that's something that a lot of, I'm excited to see where this will go. I know that this is a very different way of thinking about things, and I think, Salita, you hit the nail on the head. We just move very slowly, right? And so it's the timeline, right? When you think about people who are innovators, they don't have time to go through a very long, drawn-out public procurement process. We do have to be responsible as, state entities and regulators to make sure that, whatever technology is going into the built environment is safe and reliable and actually addressing the greater needs of people. But stay tuned. I'm actually excited about this one.
Yeah, no, it's great because, you can have an organization like the, Social Security Office or the Housing Authority or, pick your department, the Agriculture Department, where your customers, they all have customers, they all have customer service desks, they all need to efficiently get there. The more time it takes for those, customers to circle around, not know where the parking is, right? So, it's those kinds of things of sourcing, what are the commonalities in just the regular business functions that diverse agencies have that you can then aggregate those together and say, we're going to put out, again, a reverse pitch challenge, help us answer this. And you may get a contract not only with the Department of Transportation, but also with the Social Security Administration and also with so-and-so and also with so-and-so. And, your customers, the residents of Michigan, get a better service also because now they've got a common kind of solution that they know is familiar to them regardless of what agency they're going then to. As an example, there's many others. But, Nora, these collaborations, bringing people together, creating the time and the space to do that is not easy, right? Salita is a little busy. I know Justine is. So creating well-structured programs, really making it worth these executives' time to come together, to think about those common problems, to noodle through how are you going to do that. What is the federal government's interest in trying to facilitate those? The JPO is supporting this collaboration among the 10 cities for the World Cup. Why?
So my office really tries to collaborate across many different federal research facilities, right? To try to bring innovation to, I don't want to say commercialization, but to promote economic growth, right? Our interest is to facilitate that conversation. I think we have learned models of cohorts of peer exchanges, the value that adds to all the participants. I recently attended a queue warning system peer exchange that Virginia Department of Transportation wanted to host. So we have division offices in every state, right? So we know who's doing what, or at least we try to have tabs on what they're doing. And then we reach out and said, who is interested in participating? So we provide that platform for them to collaborate, to share experiences, to say, this worked for me, this did not work for me, to learn from each other. I think from our perspective, states take very well experiences from other states. They don't like to hear the feds tell them what to do, which is, So we facilitate that conversations because at the end of the day, we want to see economic growth. We want to see roadway safety as a priority for the department, and all of that helps with that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a critically important piece of investment to create that space. And obviously, it starts to bring together the various research that the federal government has done and helps us kind of build that market intelligence and build the next innovations. Salita, as we were prepping for this panel, I thought you said something really powerful and really important to articulate further, which is that governments don't do startups well.
Was that, I said a lot of other things
You said
also.
a lot of other things. I won't quote
Right.
a bunch of those.
Okay, great.
But talk about that. I think so many startups, and we'll talk to Justine about why that, what is the space that OFME resides in. But, you're a major buyer, but you're not necessarily buying from brand new startups.
Well, you also said or maybe Laura said, come ready to sell, but government has to do its part and we have to come ready to buy, right? So if we're going to do this 10 city cohort and we're going to ask the private sector to take it seriously, then we have to also figure out how we get out of our own way, right? How can San Francisco, Seattle, and Los Angeles participate in a joint procurement, right? How can we collectively buy something, right? Which would be, we figured it out in some sectors, right? There's mass purchasing for example, for transit vehicles, right? Where there'll be a collective, a collaborative, they'll make a big order and then it'll all get distributed, right? So we know we can do it, but the infrastructure is kind of clunky and it's not always there. And what I was referring to when I made that comment specifically was the early days of bike share. So, when bike share kind of came on the scene in the United States, it was way before my time. I'm way too young to have been around and experienced any of this firsthand, but I'm just speaking from, hearsay. But what happened was, there were just a few companies in the game. It was very nascent. People were trying to figure out how to fund it. There was some weird, Quebecois economic nationalism at play because one of the main companies was located in Canada. And it was, companies were, the market was sorting itself out. Companies were getting bought. They were disappearing. And for people who, on the government side, that were trying to invest in it with public dollars as a true extension of public transit and not just a tinker toy that you sort of put on a few corners in your city, it was difficult to make the case that ought to be a real investment and could really be an extension of public transit, not just because bicycling is really looked at as outside of social norms in the United States, but also because it was so turbulent. You were putting money into something and then a company would disappear, and then what? You're left with these stranded assets. You don't know what to do with them. Or you do a pilot, you run out of money, and there wasn't a kind of a safety net there, and then those companies would disappear and you'd end up with the same situation. And so there's a higher bar in government, which is what I think is important, right? When the private sector says, well, why don't you just, put some money into this or put some money into that, and why can't you be more innovative, and why can't you move more quickly? And it's well, because the bar is higher, because there are greater expectations for government not to fail. And startup core value is failure, right? So putting those two things together is a very uncomfortable fit. And so we don't often do it well because we haven't, or we wall it off, right? We have some little small area over here. Oh, I have $500,000 for my incubator. What are you going to get for $500,000? Not much, right? But you're allowed to, you can play with that money, but the money that would be meaningful, you can't play with because the stage is too public, the bar is too high, the risks are too great, and the liability exposure is very real, right? I remember in the early days of bike share, there was just so much angst about helmets, right? Well, if we're going to put bikes out there, we got to have helmets. Remember the helmet vending machines? Right. And people were going to be, I was like, what is it? When you go to the bowling alley, is somebody going to be there with a little aerosol spray bottle spraying the helmet before I put it? I don't want to put it, who had this before me? I don't want to, what's in the vending machine, right? Those kinds of questions were real and existential for public agencies, especially for staff who are deposed in lawsuits. Right. and are held accountable when somebody suffers a tragic crash on the public infrastructure. So like it's just hard. We so need to be able to nudge the market with our buying power towards real solutions, but it is so hard for us to get to those upstream startups. But that's exactly where the co-creation and collaboration potential lies.
Yeah. And, it's just, change is hard. We know that, quote all the time. But bringing in something different, it garners a lot of attention. There's a lot of eyes on it. There's a lot of things happening there. And then, we like to, say, well, fail fast and you should try and it's important to try. And, everybody believes that. But that visibility, for things that are new and different, it's fascinating to me, and we won't comment on it, but there's lots of highways to nowhere. There's tons of millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure that we've built that is obsolete and unused, but that does not draw the attention of wasted public dollars the way that some of these other things do, because they're new and they're different and they're high visibility.
I want to make one last point about that, which is that while aggregating our market power is one of the places where we can have the most meaningful effect on said market, when we aggregate our market power, we create a very vulnerable surface for attack, right? It's not just one city. Now I've got all these cities, and they're not just in here doing things in their own rabbit warrens, they're under this one umbrella. And if I, as a private company or whoever, don't like what they're doing, I've now got a bullseye that I can take aim at, and I can make it about waste of public dollars. There's a million other red herrings I could throw at it that reinforce people's ideas about government. And now I haven't just had a chilling effect on one city. I've had a chilling effect on multiple cities, which was the really high wire risk act of the Open Mobility Foundation, because there were a lot of entities that did not want that whole spec to become a thing. Right. And when you had all those cities together in one place, well, it was a very juicy surface to shoot arrows at.
Yeah. Well, Laura, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, something that I thought about as you're talking, Slade, is we often talk about public-private partnership, right? Like public-private partnership on everything. And yes, that's important. But one thing that I've seen be very, very successful with our private sector members is private-private partnership, right? So, and Salita mentioned this, Justine touched a little bit on this, which is how can you actually solve the problem that the agencies are actually saying is the problem, but how can you actually solve multiple problems and have some downstream effect, right? The example of, the mobile bathrooms. Whoever thought that would be the super popular thing, but it's solving for more than just the initial problem, and that's the power of it. And when you start, what I see a lot with our private sector members is we host a conference every year, and every year, without fail, at the conference and after the conference, we see multiple private sector partnership announcements, because they finally figured out how they need to partner to help actually solve more challenges with fewer things the public sector needs to buy, right? That's the other key point, is the public sector doesn't want to have to buy 10 different things to each solve one challenge, right? They want these integrated, holistic solutions. And there's so much opportunity, I think, on the private sector side to start to think creatively about the partnerships. If you're a startup, is there, a legacy infrastructure provider you can partner with and add to their service, right? To make it not only easier for the agency to buy your solution with an existing vendor, but also you're solving multiple problems and they don't have to go out and procure 10 different things. And so I think thinking about it in that different way too from the private sector side is really important. And I've seen it be successful in many, many different contexts.
Yeah. Justine, I want to, you had the fantastic Michigan Mobility Conference, by the way. Keep your eye on whenever the next one's going to be. It was the inaugural one. It was amazing. Congratulations. But at that conference, I struck up a conversation with Michigan's head of transit, the Gene Russman. And we were talking about this really unique space that OFME kind of resides in, and that unique sort of service that you give to other departments. And she said, look, to Salita's point, I don't want to deal with startups. I don't know if they're going to last. I don't know if this is a proven solution. Too many eyes on me. Everybody's got, their guns pointed at transit anyway, trying to show what a failure it is. Anyway, I can't afford that kind of risk. I know what we're providing right now is not the end all be all and serves, all the needs that it could. I need innovation. I just can't afford, to have that exposure and to have that tied so closely to my program. Enter OFME that explicitly creates that space to try and can use some of the funding then from the DOT to enable that. If you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why this office is so unique. So that experience that you had with Gene Russman is probably shared across multiple state departments. And we're very intentional about, one, creating this space of being a trusted partner. And internally within government, and that says a lot too, again, when you have folks who have very limited time, bandwidth, and literally are saying, I can't afford the risk, right? Mm-hmm. We usually will come in and say, that's our sweet spot. We love when there's a company that's like, and I mean, you could say this, we have the first wireless charging roadway in the country, right? And this came out of a trip to Israel and seeing the technology and saying, they're doing it there and they're doing it in a bunch of other places. We should do it in Michigan. And bringing this innovation back to Michigan, and it took time. It wasn't like we brought it back and 2 weeks later we had the first wireless charging roadway. No, it took a few years in the making, but it was literally bringing all of the different stakeholders aside just to say, here's what we're seeing in other places. Our governor said, fix the damn roads so many times, but how do we future-proof the damn roads, right? And so future-proofing that is really thinking about a roadway beyond just a road, how we see a road, but this can be a smart platform now that can do so many other things in just the traditional way of how we've been thinking about charging. Let's try to bring this here. And yes, there were many conversations. Yes, there were many moments where I think some folks probably wanted to throw their hands up and say, we can't do this, but that created even more of a need to bring the stakeholders together, unpack some of the challenges, especially when it comes to, well, what happens if this, what happens when there's snow, right? Like even just basic things, right? Will this road still charge, right? And like, hey, tech provider, show us what you've done in other places. Look, they've done it in other places. You build those concerns into your contract. You make sure you're thinking about what this pilot is hoping to achieve. And really just, I think, leaning into this level of over collaboration, removing the silos. And I think that's something why this office is so unique, is because we do that on a regular basis. We're not afraid to talk about the elephant in the room, the thing that's going to be uncomfortable for folks. And we're also not afraid to shout our success or, hey, we're trying something new out. Here's a press release of the thing that we're trying out that we don't know what it's going to look like, but we're doing it, right? And that's the thing. We are regularly embracing our innovators. We're regularly understanding that when we talk about economic development, you cannot have a conversation without entrepreneurship. You can't have a conversation about the birth of small businesses that have then transitioned into larger businesses. We have to keep that going. And so I think that's where we're a little bit unique, because we do work across multiple different state departments on these topics. And yes, they are hard, right? And they're complex. And I think that's the sweet spot for us, is that the complexity doesn't make us fear the innovation and the technology. It actually makes us lean in a little bit more.
Right. And I think importantly, you also then have kind of that pathway to scaling, right? So you can test it out. Gene's right there watching. You're in partnership with
and she's collecting
Michigan
the data
DOT
on a regular basis.
Right. If it works, she's going to be first in line to buy, and that's a great thing. If it doesn't work, it's okay. You can move on to the next innovation. No harm, no foul.
Yeah, and we share that information too with our
right.
other private partners across the state. So the home of the big three, hey, are there opportunities here for these companies to partner with you? Same for the suppliers, same for the academic partners. So this is a conversation that just doesn't stop at government only.
Right, it's great. And, Nora, I want to talk a little bit. So, there's been this sort of, long hoped for desire. U.S. we don't do a stellar job in investing in transportation innovation. Not the way that, say, we invest in defense innovation. We have some of the best weapons in the world because we invest in the creation of those. Transit, not so much.
DOD actually, speaking of whom, has done a pretty good job of investing in and nurturing and innovation. It can be done.
Well, that's what thank you, Selena. That's what I want to let Nora talk about. It's like how your office is one, together with, some functions in the secretary's office, but your office is one where you do that investment, and you collaborate across areas and across the modal administrations to really catalyze those improvements. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my office, fairly new to the office, but it was really interesting for me to find out that it sits between Federal Highway Administration, but also the Office of the Secretary of Research, right? And they're very upfront with innovation. They really want to see that. The vision of my office is to transform the way the America moves in a safe and efficient manner. So we're always looking for partnerships with academia, with those that can bring those innovations. And we don't just focus on Federal Highway Administration, right? So we work with NHTSA, we work with FDA, we work with FRA, we work with many other different agencies to try to capture what is working for them, what is not working for them. I do want to mention the Small Business Innovation Research Program. When you talk about startups and the federal government, if you are not familiar with the program, I would suggest you get on the distribution list. And this is going back to the innovation doesn't have to be flashy, right? So a couple of years ago, a colleague of mine sent this call for people to apply to design a mini roundabout, right? So roundabouts, we know they're useful for roadway safety. They reduce number of fatalities. So some of the criteria that they decided to put, it had to be recyclable material. It had to be put in place really quick. The pieces had to be able to have two people carry them. So we had submissions, right? In the company that won the proposal, they did a fantastic job designing it, right? So if you can think of a pizza in the different slices, and then they chop those pieces. So talk about innovation, right? So they also had specifications on it had to support certain truck load, right, for the intersection. At the same time, I remember the design was great. It was tested in the lab. So we are in deployment. So we're at the intersection. The truck arrives. We have all the work zone set up, and the people are able to carry the pieces. One of the things that they did not think through when they were designing is the number of holes that had to be drilled to be able to hold the mini roundabout on the street, like in the middle of the intersection. So talk about innovative, and at the same time, you have to pivot, right? So we knew for the next location, it had to be a different design because it was taking too long for them to set it up. So SBIR is a good program. I know that all the modal agencies participate. And if you have an idea that you think is going to solve some of the big challenges that we have, they welcome those ideas. And then they'll share that with our agency. And if they like it, if they think this has legs, then they have a general announcement for others to submit proposals.
Yeah, and I just think, some of the work that the JPO does really fills that really critical R&D gap. I briefly served in the Federal Transit Administration. One of the things that that the JPO was funding on our behalf was a bus compartment redesign, meaning the cab that the drivers are in, which, maintaining drivers to all of the issues that Salita raised, it's really a challenge. Part of it is that cab had not really been modernized to fit the needs of the operator very well in, 20 years, right? And it's just not, selling buses is not a high profit exercise that you really have the space for that kind of R&D that is really human-centered. The JPO was then able to really kind of facilitate using, human factors design and using ergonomic kinds of factors to really help with that bus compartment redesign, which is transformative to the transit industry.
Absolutely. So when we have a call for projects with the modal agencies, we hear a lot of the challenges that they're facing, right? So we try to fund some of those research. We make sure that all the offices that need to be involved are involved. I mean, there's a lot of eyes because we are stewards of money, right? The public money. So, but I feel like we're very proactive in the office. I mean, some of the things that we are always going to be interested is what is the new technology, and can we provide guidance or technical support to the states, to the locals, so they don't have to figure things out themselves. So we're always going to be there with that, with funding. So if we have challenges that we set, for example, the intersection safety challenge, that was a result of seeing so many fatalities after COVID. And we know that a fourth of fatalities happen at intersections. Right. So we knew we had to do something with that. So that came out of the Office of the Secretary to through us to call for innovation. So different vendors came together. The private. It was very interesting to see the proposals that came through. And we're really trying to see technology fusion at the intersection level, because ideally we'll be able to deploy that technology across the country in so many intersections.
So, we've talked about different sort of pieces of the product, the innovation roadmap. One of them is really kind of matching the problem with potential solutions, or better articulating what that challenge set is so that you can get that innovation. Another piece of it is really funding and providing the kind of market scale that can support the investment in that. And then we've also talked about really the need to then have that pathway to market where they can recoup some of that. A lot of that has to do with that first contract with government. And maybe Salita and Justine, if you can talk a little bit about that, of like, what is that importance of landing that first contract? What is your role then in helping these different solutions scale beyond that first contract?
So I'd say, for example, that I was mentioning before with Electrion, so getting that initial contract was a huge one, right? And so this is a pilot that they're doing. So we've worked together across the Office of Future Mobility, the City of Detroit, the utility providers. All of these players are at the table. And so we carved out what we are hoping to accomplish and to achieve, and what scalability looks like. So that was one example of how we worked really closely with our provider, but also as well as with the State Department of Transportation, understanding that we have big goals, especially around, and I'd say the metrics piece is really important, right? And so establishing those metrics ahead of time, and also building in those spaces where we say, okay, let's revisit some of these items, because things may change, right? Technology, as we look at it today, may look very differently 6 months later. And how do we think about interoperability, especially with this type of technology? So that's a metric, for example, that we make sure to really encourage for any of our operators or companies that are looking to contract with government, making sure that it is something that is agnostic to different types of use cases, and something that can be deployed in a number of different places. We do have on site in across the state a number of test sites. And at the test sites, we have places like the Detroit Smart Parking Lab. And there's a multitude of sites, and so we can feel free to reach out to me after if you want to know about the whole list. But literally, we're able to work with a number of different companies who are operating in the test site, understanding who is actually ripe enough to make it out of that small environment and then go into the built environment. So it's almost like a step approach. What you have, what you're thinking about, what your idea is, if you're not yet ready to go into the built environment, actually flagging that for our state partners. Hey, there's a company that's looking to, test how charging works at light poles, right? How do you do that? Maybe the Detroit Smart Parking Lab is the place where you start, and then you get your lessons learned, and keeping our city partners and as well as state partners informed along the way. We have a Michigan Cities working group where we literally talk about all of the different activities that are happening, and hear from some of those cities to say, actually, this is a big thing that we are trying to tackle, and we don't know how to do that. let us know some of your findings that are happening within the test site. So the same we have on the aviation side, we have a program called Flight. And the Flight program literally works in an airport setting at the Gerald R. Ford Airport. There are a number of companies that have gone through that, and companies have literally pivoted to say, you know what, we were focusing on autonomous lawn mowing, but actually there is another application as it relates to snow removal. And cities and states have to think about snow removal all the time. Actually, is there something that we can work with the city or the state to say, can we get a contract for this? So we're literally looking at these problems over and over and making sure that we're sharing the lessons learned in the smaller test site environment and looking at what's the next phase to help you get out of the test site and into the built environment. And so everyone's not going to make it. And we acknowledge that. It's not one of those things where we are saying, you know, we're putting all of our money here and everyone's going to make it out. It's not going to be the case. But some people do pivot and they make a stronger product the second time around than they did it the first time.
Yeah, I waited for 4.5 years in Pittsburgh for my street sweeping Roomba. Still waiting. But, you know, Michigan, just one other point to offer for you to speak to is that, you know, as the state on the stage, not only, I think it's interesting that the various kind of threads that you pull together, it's not only about finding those solutions that address the real problems, but you're actually translating it then into domestic manufacturing, hard tech in Michigan. And you know, once you've proven out these solutions of charging at light poles, where are you going to produce that equipment? Well, Michigan, I think, has an answer.
Yeah, and I'll speak a little bit about this. And this is something when I moved to Michigan, talking to a number of different startups and scale-ups, asking, you know, what are some of the big challenges that you have from a funding perspective that would help you take your business to the next level? And I will say one of the things about Michigan is, like, Michigan is for sure a state of makers. It's in the DNA of people. People can manufacture with their eyes closed. They dream about manufacturing. Like, it's another level. And when you think about, well, is the funding supporting manufacturing? And it was like, no, we don't have any. There's a block there. There's a barrier. So for me, hearing this information said, okay, let's try something. And, you know, I'm always cooking something. I don't really know how to cook that well, but, you know, there's always a pot on the stove, right? And so I'm like, okay, let's see if we were to launch a pilot around prototyping and put money towards prototyping. We brought in an accelerator and we said, hey, can you actually come in and provide some funding too? And we built out a program, a prototype grant program. We had over 80, probably closer to 90 to 100 companies from around the world apply for grant funding to make hard tech in Michigan. And that speaks volumes to the demand is there. And we're thinking about what these products of the future will look like, not only to support government, but how this could support other industries. How can we take these ideas and scale them to the next level? We issued, I think, close to $800,000, joint funding that was put together to 17 companies. And also for me, it's important that we think about diversity and making sure that we have an inclusive cohort 1 being, you know, minority and disadvantaged businesses that are also being put to the forefront, those who are in rural and remote communities, and, you know, those who typically are innovators and often having to think about these things, getting support along the way. So really excited about having our cohort 1 for our pilot year, and the demand is there. So that's the strong thing for me, at least, from this.
Yeah, and as a native Michigander, I'm so happy to see, you know, that we're not only just producing F-150s, but, you know, now we're seeing e-bikes and trikes and low-speed vehicles rolling off of those same assembly
And snow
lines.
removal Rumbas, you hope.
And so,
You hope.
you haven't?
Oh,
wait a minute.
that's what she said. You're gonna
We're all gonna get them.
That's what, yeah, you heard it here first.
Street sweeping
That's
remote.
what Justine had said. I just want to say one quick thing, and you know, just from a public agency perspective, the single most transformative thing that I was able to do at LADOT to bring in and accelerate innovation was to switch from a time and materials approach to contracting to a milestone approach to contracting. And that was hard, unsexy, very difficult work behind the scenes to do that. And so bold leadership matters, and it matters on small things and large things. But that was the biggest win, and the thing that really unlocked a lot more productive and fruitful output for sort of on the government side of the house.
Yeah, and I think that level of education and kind of sharing that message and being the evangelist that I know that you are, to kind of bring that kind of thinking to other cities and states and other places where you're changing the procurement kind of baseline from buying widgets to buying solutions, really is transformative. So, Laura, I'm going to let you get the last word in this, because tell us about, like, what is the role that ITS America is going to play, coming back to where we started with the 10 World Cup cities. You'll facilitate a process to issue this statement of challenge. You'll put it out into the universe, tell your friends and family it's coming sometime soon, and then you're going to be swamped with a lot of good ideas.
Well, I hope we will be. Yeah, so we will, and so we're working with Karina's team at CityFi. So, so what I'll say is that the public agencies, the cities and the transit agencies, they're going to be the ones doing the hard work, culling these ideas down into a set of 3 to 5 common problem statements, right? So it's really going to be driven by the agencies and the cities, the problems that they deem, most. I'll say this: the problems that they deem most potential to be solved by technology, right? So this is very focused on how can we bring technology solutions to bear in a quicker time frame for events happening in a year and a half, right? We don't have time to build, so this is very much focused intentionally on what technology can bring to bear. So that, by definition, right, is going to eliminate certain challenges or problem sets. So the cities and agencies will work over the next few months to cull those down. We will get to this core set of challenges. Then we will actually develop, some type of criteria around what those solutions need to be able to solve for, right? So beyond just the challenge, right? The challenge isn't just going to be I need mobile restrooms or whatever, right? So we'll have some defined criteria that needs to be addressed. We'll put the call out to the private sector. ITS America obviously has a large number of private sector entities as members. This challenge will go far beyond that. My hope is to work with everyone in this room to get the word out to all of the innovators who would potentially have a solution to bring to bear, and to get as many good ideas and good solutions that address the problem that we can. And then we will vet them, right? So then we will take on the role of evaluating, does the solution set that's being proposed actually solve the problem, that has been put out, and do that initial round of vetting. So once we get to a list of solutions that meet the criteria, then we're going to have this reverse pitch event opportunity, where those providers will be invited to come pitch to the public sector. The public sector can ask questions, right? And it can be this dialogue to really ask questions and understand better how those solutions will address those challenges. So it will be work for us, but we think that we're very excited about it, because we think there's a huge potential here to actually provide better product market fit, right? And ultimately that's what this is about, is how do we provide better product market fit for the problems that these agencies have to solve on the ground today, not some future state that, may or may not be the case, but really what they're really having to address in the here and now, particularly in the context of these very difficult and complex large events moving a lot of people in a very short amount of time.
And bringing solutions to bear by 2026, which is next week. So it really is important. I think Salita and Stephanie at LA Metro really created and were the catalyst behind this new wave of thinking. Nora stepped up. Your office stepped up with resources to help enable it. Laura is facilitating it, and then all of the work that Justine is doing through state leadership and providing those new platforms. So, it really is transformative, the kinds of openings that these leaders are creating in the innovation space. Something I think that we need to applaud and encourage and find, continue to push forward there, maintaining a sense of purpose, maintaining a sense of sort of ethical direction in these things, and making that investment possible. So if you'll join me in thanking these leaders and appreciating their time.